Awesome. Thank you. Well, yeah, my name is Bethany Ray and I'm with the Watershed Alliance. And we presented with you guys a couple years back in person, right around the time we were launching the program. And now we've been here a couple years and wanted to come back and let you guys know what's been going on. So Megan from Portland Audubon is going to kind of kick it off and we'll take turns. So go ahead, Megan.
Well, hello, everyone. I actually wasn't here a couple years ago. I joined the team in Portland Audubon about 2 years ago. And so I am the Backyard Habitat Program Manager that's based at Audubon. So if you want to go to the next slide, Bethany, I'll just give a little overview of our presentation. So we're going to give an overview of the program, talk a little bit about the why and the how, and how you all can get involved, and then leave some time for Q&A at the end. And as Bethany mentioned, we'll just kind of oscillate back and forth. So to start, we'll just tell you a little bit about the program in general, but also the program in Clark County more specifically. And I have to give a shout out to one person, Helen, who I saw here, who's actually a volunteer with the program. So kudos to Helen for already supporting the program in that way. So just to start as kind of an overview of the program, it is a co-managed program. The two kind of nonprofit partners that kind of are kind of the parents to the program across the 4-county region is Columbia Land Trust and Portland Audubon. And as I mentioned, I work for Portland Audubon. I imagine you all are pretty familiar with us. You know, our kind of motto mission is to inspire all people to love and protect birds, wildlife, and the natural environment upon which life depends. And so for our kind of role within Backyard Habitat, I'm based in the conservation department. And then my co-manager, Susie Peterson, is based at Columbia Land Trust. And they're also kind of a land trust focused on the Columbia River region. And they conserve and care for the vital lands, waters, and wildlife throughout that region. And to date, it's been about 50,000 acres that they have conserved, which is pretty impressive. So Bethany, if you want to go to the next slide. And so speaking about that, right, the program really started as a partnership, and I always think that's a really key part of the program. It was Portland Audubon and actually the Three Rivers Land Conservancy that kind of later melded with the Columbia Land Trust and really came together with the idea to start this program. And the origins of the program were actually a group of neighbors in Southwest Portland that were working to remove ivy in a park in Southwest Portland. And they were finding that if they're really going to be successful in removing the ivy, that they were actually going to need to engage the adjacent properties. So they did a pilot where they kind of reached out to see if adjacent properties to this park would kind of engage in the effort to, you know, help remove ivy and take other actions. And people responded really well, and it kind of continued to grow. And kind of in the early days, they worked with other partners to really get input about the very formation of the program. And officially in 2009, it launched Portland-wide. And it, you know, kind of very intentionally has continued to expand since then. Kind of initially it expanded into Gresham and Lake Oswego, and then through kind of a multi-year, more intentional process, we expanded the program across the kind of entirety of urban and suburban, Clark, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington County. So we now work with residents across that entire 4-county area. And one of the ways that's kind of really critical is when we expanded in both into Lake Oswego, but kind of more relevant for you all into Clark County, we did that in partnership with a local nonprofit, which is the Watershed Alliance, who really helps us do the on-the-ground work in Clark County. So I'll pass it to Bethany to talk about that.
Yeah, so I work with the Watershed Alliance. I'm one of the program coordinators there, and our kind of whole focus is focusing on watershed health issues around Clark County. We do invasive species removal events, tree planting events. We have our educational film series, all kinds of things to get folks engaged locally in environmental projects with watershed health kind of at the focus. And so we partnered with Columbia Land Trust and Portland Audubon to bring this program into 2019. And so far have close to 300 sites, about 290 to 95 sites that I've visited so far, and about 50 yards have been certified. And I know there's probably 5 or 6 of you on this meeting that I've already been to your house. So that's pretty cool. It's good to see you here. And I know at least one of you guys is, no, 2 of you are certified already. So that's pretty exciting too. So thanks for being part of our early days getting this program launched. It's been fun to do that.
All right, so as you all know, or may know, kind of the mission of the program, of course, is to work with urban and suburban residents to really provide folks with tools, resources, and recognition for gardening sustainably, and gardening really with the intention of creating wildlife habitat. So kind of rethinking what it means to do landscaping and how you care for your yard. And so why is this all important? And I imagine that you all could probably answer this question yourself, but I always still think it's really important to kind of ground the why of the program before kind of talking about some of the other elements. So if you'll go to the next slide, Bethany. I always appreciate this slide because one thing it really, I feel like kind of pauses and makes me think about is, right, like, all of us, you know, we're one species among the many species that call this region home. And of course, all of us are trying to get our basic needs met, right, for food and shelter. And so forth. And so, you know, it's always thinking about who are all the inhabitants of this region, right? So all of the species of birds and other wildlife that call this region home. And we are really incredibly lucky, of course, that we live in this really biodiverse region. So that's kind of one part of it, right? The why is like making this a habitable place for all of us. But onto the next slide, I often think, right, like it's not only for those of us that reside here year round or primarily year round, it's also for the folks that kind of pass through, right? So we live in the middle of the Pacific Flyway, and millions of birds migrate through here each year. And of course, as you all know, like our region provides critical nesting and wintering habitat. And so we need to ensure that this is, you know, those passing through can also get their needs met within this region of ours. Next slide. But of course, right, like recognizing the biodiversity of our region, you know, we can't not talk about the fact that you know, there's a lot of research that's coming out that's talking about the decline in, you know, honestly, many bird species, but including common bird species, right? And this is commenting on Oregon birds, of course, which are often Washington birds as well. But that we're seeing pretty significant declines over the past 40 years in a lot of our common bird species. But if you go to the next slide, it's not just our bird species, right? Like we're seeing this with our bee and insect population. So it's this biodiverse region, but we're also having to couple that with the fact that we're experiencing declines. Next slide. And, you know, there's always the question of like, what is causing those declines? And again, I imagine a lot of you can speak to these. And there's the really big picture aspects of it, right? Climate change, loss of habitat, you know, which of course development is part of that loss of habitat among other factors. And, you know, Vancouver Audubon Society, Portland Audubon, you know, Audubon chapters everywhere, Columbia Land Trust, you know, the Watershed Alliance, like these big scale issues are definitely things that we're actively working to address. But of course, there's also additional human hazards that we all can play a very active role in doing something differently with. And so, you know, one thing that I am always so appreciative of in working at Portland Audubon is the Wildlife Care Center, right? And also the data that we get out of the Wildlife Care Center tells us a lot. And, you know, one of the primary reasons that birds are admitted to the Wildlife Care Center is outdoor domestic house cats. I think that's number one. I think number three is window strikes or window collisions. But also just, human hazard impacts are right introduced, noxious weeds and the use of pesticides. And as you'll see a little bit later, right, our program very actively is recognizing what these causes of decline are and then trying to create solutions for addressing them. So next slide. And what I like about this, right, is in it, right, in the upper image, right, like we see a lot of landscapes that look like this. And when I think about landscapes, I try to think about it from a bird's eye view, right, or even an insect's perspective of where you're going to get your needs met, right, as a bird, right? And is it going to be this landscape or is it going to be kind of this lower landscape here? And Bethany, if you click just like one or two more times, I think a couple more images pop up, right? So you can really see, right, like where is a bird able to get their needs met, right, versus where isn't. So can we take, right, that kind of upper image and transform it, right? Can we create these spaces that do that? And on the next slide, I'll give Bethany a minute. I definitely get asked this question, right? Like sometimes it's when people are feeling dissuaded by the amount of work ahead of them. But like, does their 1 yard matter, right? Does your 1 yard matter? And I always really like to think about this in terms of scale, right? And of course, 1 yard matters in and of itself, but it's really the compounding effect, right? When you add it up and when you can create those corridors or when you can really create that connectivity and, kind of where the cursor is right there, you can really see the areas, right, where, it's that vegetation, whether it's street trees, yard trees, and the additional vegetation, right, is really creating those corridors of connectivity. And so the more that we can fill this in and like in essence green this map, right, the bigger impact we're going to be able to have to create those connectivity corridors and really make a difference. And this map, we do this about once a year. So, and if you all can see, it says January 2021. So we'll be able to update this and have our January 2022 map soon. But this is a map of the sites enrolled in the program as of January 2021. And you can clearly see, right, where the program has been longer and kind of where we're working to fill in the map yet here. And one thing I personally always think about in the work that I get to do is like each of those dots is a place that's being restored, but it's also a community of people, right? Each of those dots represents at least one person, if not many, that are doing the work to make this difference, right? And I think that's just as important, right? The role of folks in the community being stewards is really important. And Bethany, if you click on this, a couple of times, you start to see these are all folks that have gotten certified within the program in about the last year, right? So these are just all of the people, or just a small snapshot of all the people that are kind of making up all of those dots on the map, right? It's pretty powerful when we can see who all of these folks are in these spaces that they're restoring, and look how happy they are. So it's a lot of fun too. And so a couple of highlights to share are currently we have 8,500 properties that are enrolled across the 4-county region. And those 8,500 properties add up to cumulatively about 1,900 acres. Of those, 2,700 properties have reached certification. And I always know these numbers are slightly outdated, but I know it's at least 1,500 volunteer hours have been dedicated to the program, and well over 115,000 total native trees and shrubs have been planted as a result, which is pretty powerful. And then Bethany can talk a little about our Clark County specific numbers.
Yeah, so this is one of our participants who's also a volunteer with the program. Her name's Renita, and this is her yard. And she's one of about 53 who've been certified so far. And we've visited about 290 properties across Clark County. And so that's kind of spreading the whole gamut of anyone who's under an acre. So out in Camas, Washougal, up to Ridgefield and all of Vancouver and the county. So it's pretty cool. So how does it work? Let me tell you. So who can participate in the program? The focus is on yards that are under an acre. For yards that are over an acre, we refer them to the conservation district because they have resources for those larger properties. But what we do is focus on the private properties, about an acre or less, and then community sites. So examples of that would be like multifamily housing, places of worship, businesses or nonprofits, schools, community gardens, and whatever other kinds of spots you can think of. So for example, we've partnered with a couple of the Vancouver School District schools to start their gardens, and one's been certified already. A lot of the schools have some kind of gardening program through the Clark County Green Schools. And so we're just trying to couple their requirements with what we're looking for in this program to get them certified as a green school and a backyard habitat. So how the program works for the homeowner, there's a wait list. And so in Clark County, we've got a little bit of a wait list. So we ask folks to enroll. And then when your name comes up on the wait list, there's about a 3-month wait at the moment. Then you can pay the enrollment fee, which is a sliding scale fee. And then you have the site visit with the habitat technician. And currently that's me. So I would come out to your yard. And then at that site visit, we walk your property and we look at what you've got going on for habitat, and you'll get a resource packet that includes coupons for buying native plants, as well as I'll write up a site report for you, and you get an in progress sign, which is pictured here on the top there, certification in progress, to let people know what you're up to. And then you get to work, and that's usually weed removal, managing those noxious weeds, and adding native plants. And then after a few months, I do a follow-up call about 6 months later or so, and see how it's going. Those heat domes and ice storms and things can sometimes foible your plants. So it's nice to check in and see how things are going. We also offer consultation calls if you need a little extra support along the way. And then when you think you've met the benchmarks for certification, then you reach out and a volunteer comes out to see what you've done. And then you get certified if you've met the benchmarks, either silver, gold, or platinum. And we'll talk a little bit about that next. But you get a certification sign. That's a metal sign. It says what level you've been certified. And then a few other incentives like gift cards and things to reward the work that you've done. And then you can get upgraded if you continue to make progress. And after 3 years, we ask you to renew, which just means you're still doing it. So those are kind of the steps of the program. And so I referred to the levels. There's 3 levels: silver, gold, and platinum. And they all kind of hit the same categories. They just have increasingly harder benchmarks to hit. So we'll talk about what those are, because there's 5 areas that we focus on. The first, and these all address those reasons for decline that Megan just mentioned. So why are the birds and pollinator populations decreasing? Let's try to address those. So removing noxious weeds is a really important one. And we've got a list based on input from all different scientists and agencies around the area on what weeds they would consider a priority for your yard to be removed. So different ones for silver, gold, and platinum level. And then the second point is naturescaping. And so that's a style of landscaping, and it focuses on using native plants as much as possible. We'll talk more about that, but that's another category. Pesticide reduction, we're looking at reducing how much chemical and how much input is being put into the yard, particularly pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, all those categories. The end of the word side means kill something. And so we're trying to avoid killing things. That's kind of the idea. And then the 4th one is wildlife stewardship, and the 5th is stormwater management. And those have a menu of options that I'll show you. But basically all these things together kind of provide a healthy habitat for the the birds and insects living on your property. So that noxious weed category, the idea is noxious weeds are basically forming monocrops. It's the only weed around. So you've probably seen areas where ivy or blackberry, for example, has taken over in the forest or in a field. And so that means that the native plants are not able to thrive anymore. And it's just largely one species, which isn't what the birds need. So we're trying to kind of clear it out and kind of restart where it would have been had those weeds not taken over. Those weeds alter the native ecology, and also some of them even cause soil erosion or change the nutrients in the soil so that the native plants can't grow. And so if we can clear those out and restore the health of the system, it's better for the critters and the soil. So for silver, gold, and platinum, there's different weeds at each level. So some examples pictured below. The silver level, that's garlic mustard. The gold level, that's Italian arum. And the platinum is vinca or periwinkle. And I've been seeing a lot of vinca and a lot of Italian arum lately in Clark County. So if you've got those, I'd prioritize removing them. For naturescaping, there's basically an area of your yard that we want to see focused on this style of landscaping, of naturescaping. For silver, it would be 5% of your yard. For gold, it'd be 15, and for platinum, it'd be 50, which is a lot, but it's doable. I've seen it done in Clark County a few times now, and it's really exciting. So when we're saying naturescaping, we want to see a yard that's got an area or a couple areas that are focused on planting with mostly native plants and in layers. And we focus on the layers because you'll see on the left, different birds live and focus on different layers. So if you had all ground covers, for example, you're missing out on opportunity to have these birds that really need the bigger canopies. So if you can have concentrated areas in your yard that have those diverse layers, the more diversity in your plants, the more diversity you'll have in your insects and birds as well. And so we want to focus too on density. So rather than having 100 native plants and scattering them all over the yard, we want to focus on a couple areas of your yard, at least 5% of the yard for silver certification. So that way you're basically recreating a little pocket of habitat that would have been there if your house wasn't there. That's how I like to think about it. Like, what plants would have been here? And so let's rebuild that habitat with the species diversity and the layers. And when you bunch things together by similar species, it's easier for the birds and the insects to find you and benefit from your yard. So that's another goal of ours. A lot of people ask the question, like, where do the plants need to be native to? And it's a tricky question because the word native doesn't actually have like a consistent definition. So it could be used to describe like the broader Northwest region, but we've focused in on this program to the lower Willamette Valley, and it's represented in that red circle on the map right there. And we call it the Portland Plant List. It's a list that a lot of scientists in the region put together of the plants that would have been here before European colonization. So those are the plants we want to focus on now because we know that's what the birds and insects are looking for and they need. And so we've focused in on that list. So rather than plants like from the coast or the mountains, we focus in on Portland Plant List for our criteria. And then why native plants? Our birds and insects here depend on them. So 90% of insects depend on native plants for some part of their survival, whether it's their food source, it's where they nest. A lot of them are specialists. And so if we don't have the plants that the insects need, we don't have the insects. And then a lot of our birds, 96% of our birds feed on those insects. And 100% of adult amphibians and reptiles also need those insects. And so without the insects, or without the plants, we don't get the insects. So it's a big chain reaction. The third category was the reducing of pesticides. And so we use a website called Grow Smart, Grow Safe. to help us out with this category because they've ranked a lot of the commercially available chemicals based on how toxic they are to people. And so, or to people, to birds, to the habitat. So red, yellow, and green, or it looks like orange there in the middle, that moderate hazard level, but we call it yellow. So those are the 3 levels. We're trying to avoid the use of red zone chemicals. That would be something like your Roundup type chemicals, and lean towards green if you have to use anything. This website is handy because you can search by chemical or by pest issue. So if you had a pest problem and you didn't know what to do, you could go there and they would list the non-chemical methods first, the most natural methods, and suggest how you could tackle the problem. So it's a good resource to know about if something comes up. We also encourage folks along the lines of pesticide reduction to practice what we call integrated pest management, or IPM. And the idea with IPM is basically you're taking a multifaceted approach to your pest problem so that you don't just see a bug and spray it. There's a lot of steps you can take in between. So I like to think about it like if I had ants in my house. Do I have 5 ants or 5,000 ants or a million ants? These are different problems, and I would have to approach them from different ways. I'd have to observe, where are they going? Where are they coming from? Can I clean up the mess that they want to eat? Can I plug the hole that they came from, and would that solve my problem? Or do I need to take a bigger approach? And if I do have to use a chemical, is there a least toxic option first? Is the idea. So we encourage folks to understand this concept and just try to use as little insecticides and herbicides as possible. The 4th category is wildlife stewardship, and this is a menu of options. We look for 1 item for silver, 2 for gold, and 3 for platinum. This one I find is the one that people want to do all of the things, which is really fun to see. And so some of the examples on this page you'll see are water features. A lot of people can put in a bird bath or an insect bath to like a waterfall fountain. At any of those levels, we call it a water feature. A bird, and the key is maintained water feature. That one would be important. Then you've got bird and bat nest boxes, insect nesting habitat like a mason bee house, and snags and nurse logs. And for the most part, we don't see a lot of snags and nurse logs unless there's an opportunity, like an ice storm or something happens. And now this snag here, this is in Megan's yard. So maybe she'll tell the story later on how she got this snag, but it's kind of not something that every yard can do or has the opportunity for, but it's a way to take a bummer of a situation and make it kind of better for the insects and the birds who live on your yard. Some other menu options for wildlife stewardship are reducing your outdoor lighting and reducing your bird and window strikes. And I heard you guys talking about that in regards to the wildlife refuge and their new windows. Things like bird safe windows would fall under that category. We've also got native pollinator meadows like the one at the school garden down here. And then keeping our cats safe. The Cat Safe at Home program focuses on having indoor only or catios for your cats to keep them safe from the outside and the birds safe from them. So all of those things are some of the wildlife stewardship options. And then for managing stormwater, we've got another menu of options. And again, we're looking for 1 for silver, 2 for gold, or 3 for platinum. And so some of those are things like having a large canopy tree, because of just how much stormwater runoff can be captured by the leaves of a tree and the roots of a tree. Disconnecting your downspouts. So instead of downspouts going straight into the street or the storm system or the sewer, we're looking for opportunities where people can let the water soak in on site. All of these stormwater management principles are trying to reduce how much water leaves your property and keep it on site, because that's what would have happened there naturally. Like a rain garden. A rain garden is when you take the downspout and you reroute it to a garden that's a basin shape full of native plants that will help absorb the water and filter it. And then also removing lawn or impermeable surfaces. That's what this one's showing, is removing some sidewalk. The idea there being that if the surface is more pervious, then the water can soak in on site rather than flowing away. Some other stormwater options are leaving your leaves, which helps restore the soil and again allows the soil to hold more moisture. It also brings more birds and insects to your yard when you leave the leaves, so it's kind of a double whammy. Doing extra naturescaping counts as stormwater management. Conserving water by not watering your lawn, and also using eco-friendly yard maintenance like battery powered equipment over gas powered. All of those things fall under stormwater management. So those were the criteria, basically, those 5 categories, and increasingly harder benchmarks to meet based on what certification level you're trying to hit. And then as an organization, or as a program, I mean, we've got partnerships with lots of other organizations. And so a couple of those in Vancouver area are Friends of Trees. They offer a coupon for a free native tree to our participants in City of Vancouver, which is pretty cool. And then also we're partnering with Vancouver area high schools to have students grow and sell native plants in their plant sales. So a lot of the schools have horticulture programs that were already growing plants, and some of them were incorporating natives, but now more and more of them are including those. So assuming COVID doesn't shut them down again this year, they should have their native plant sales again this year in the spring, excuse me, about April or May is when they usually do them, depending on the school. And so that's a great way to support the local students and get more native plants for your yard. In this picture here is one of our schools. This is Flex Academy, and they have a naturescaped area, and it is accessible to the public, so you could go check it out, but they got certified recently, so that was pretty exciting. We also have some community demonstration sites. So Naturescaping Botanical Gardens, they got certified, so you could check out that one. It's the Waterwise plot run by Meredith. That plot in the Botanical Gardens got certified, so that was pretty cool. She's added a ton of native plants to that one. I think Megan's going to touch base on the other ones, but thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, thank you, Bethany. And one thing kind of that it says at the top of this slide that I deeply believe, right, that like collaboration is key to this program. And I think about like to successfully do our work in Clark County, there's 3 different nonprofits that have come together to make this successful on the ground, which I always just think is really impressive. But we continue to look for additional partners, right? So one of our partners that we work with pretty specifically within Multnomah County, but some of the benefits from that partnership are going to be more far-reaching, which is exciting, is Verde expressed an interest to us in developing a bilingual youth naturescaping educational curriculum. So this is a curriculum that we kind of built together based around the 5 focus areas of the program, and we've now kind of delivered it to like Latino, like serving housing complexes in Northeast Portland, and it culminated with the installation of a rain garden and a naturescape at both of those sites. And we're going to be expanding that to offer it to even more sites across the region, which is really exciting, right? To really engage youth through this curriculum, but also for them to participate in the installation. It's exciting partnership. We also work with organization 50 years old, Central Cultural, in kind of the Cornelius Forest Grove area, and we're naturescaping their campus through a pretty involved community process. But part of that is we're going to be developing short Spanish language videos around the tenets of the program, like talking about why native plants are important in Spanish, right? Talking about what is stormwater management in Spanish, and that's something that we're going to be able to share with everyone throughout the region, but it's really coming out of this partnership itself, which is really wonderful. And there's many more partnerships, but one slide. Another thing that I always like to share, because it is a partnership and just a helpful thing to know, is so we do partner with local area arborist and landscape professionals. So we actually have a directory that's on our available on our website, where it's about 50 folks that either identify as, arborist or landscape professionals, and they go through a training with us. We're actually having our annual training tomorrow, but to just kind of ensure that they're very familiar with the program. They sign an MOU that if they're working with a participant of the program, they'll help support them to reach their habitat building and certification goals. And, this can be a really helpful resource for folks if needed. And one thing that we implemented last year is it's now searchable by the particular service you might want to hire someone to help you with, or by county. So you could go online to our website, to our directory, and look for arborist and landscape professionals that specifically work within Clark County. And then you can look for the particular service that you want them to help you with, right? Sometimes you might just want someone to install irrigation as one thing, or you might want an arborist that is really going to prioritize wildlife habitat. And that snag that's in my yard, that was a tree that unfortunately had been sheared by the power company for many years and was starting to die. And so I worked with one of the professionals on the directory to transform my dying hemlock into a wildlife habitat snag, and they actually took the top of the tree, placed it in my yard, and now I also have a huge nurse log. And yeah, I see so many flickers, you wouldn't believe it. It's like a flicker paradise. So this is just a really wonderful resource that I've already benefited from. Next slide, Bethany. But also, of course, right, our partnership is just with a lot of community partners is just one of the ways that Backyard Habitat really focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, there's a lot of ways as a program that we do this. Of course, we do a lot of focused skill building across our staff. And we also work with our habitat technicians as well. But we also do a lot of work with culturally specific Black, Indigenous, and people of color led organizations, and organizations that specifically serve folks that are BIPOC. And to really ensure that if, we're addressing barriers to access, right? But we also work really closely with our community partners to get feedback about ways that maybe we can improve the program to make it more accessible. And, one of the things that came out of that was that we did shift about a year ago to a sliding scale fee. We didn't want cost to be a barrier. But these are just some photos of like the ways that we've really been able to integrate this through amazing partnerships. So on the right corner there, this is a mini entity partnership, but this is a multifamily housing complex. Right? Not everybody has access to land where they live. So this is where we've provided our curriculum in partnership with Nestor right there, who's an amazing educator. He's trained as a civil engineer and knows way more about stormwater management than I do. But he's developed this really amazing curriculum, and we did a great planting. And all of the kids in this picture, also you can see the little pots on the right-hand side, they got to take home their own native plant to help kind of care for it, right? Because there's a space at their community that's shared, but also their own plant, because they don't have that space themselves. Another really amazing project is these pedestrian bridges here. This is one way that we worked with a community, specifically the Asian Pacific Islander community. This is along the Jade District in Portland, and there was a lot of pedestrian deaths along this bridge. So we partnered with the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon to work with community members to find out what they wanted for their community, and they wanted to paint these bridges, but also install naturescaping. So the bridges got painted and are beautiful, but then also there was this planting event under them. And then kind of on the left-hand side, this is working together to transform the campus at Central Cultural. This is kind of a site that people can rent out. And so we're working with the community for them to really give us input on what they want to see. So these are just some of the ways that we really try to kind of let the community give feedback on what they want. And it's helping us make really cool improvements to our program as well. So how can you get involved in the program? Well, lots of ways. Of course, the first way is that you can enroll in the program, or you can encourage other people to enroll in the program. And that can either be kind of, as Bethany spoke to earlier, you can, if you have a yard, you can enroll your own yard, but maybe, you know, your church or temple, right? Maybe there's a space there or an active group that wants to enroll and do a project, or maybe there's a community garden, a park, you know, a kid's school, etc., that's interested. So any of them can enroll in the program, and then you'll get to work with Bethany and, you know, really kind of transform it. It's really amazing what you see once you do this. Of course, you can also volunteer with the program and or the Watershed Alliance, right? And so there's kind of different ways, and we do have more and more volunteers in Clark County for the program as well. So that's super exciting. The next two really is we're really want to continue to encourage more Clark County based businesses to really be helping support folks in their efforts to do this work. So we definitely have arborist and landscape professionals that work in Clark County on our directory, but we want more folks that do, right? And more folks that really want to support folks in working to create habitat. So if you know folks doing that work, encourage them to think about joining the directory so we can direct folks to them. But in particular, this is a big one, encourage local nurseries to sell more locally native plants. So we have, Bethany briefly talked about it, hold this up. All program participants get this little flyer, and in it you get coupons for discounts at local nurseries. And this is the third year we've had it, and we were just able to add one Clark County based nursery, which is super exciting. It's Goodyear Farms. But we want to add more. We want to make native plants more accessible in Clark County itself. And so, you know, one thing that has been really helpful in the past is if you're going to a local nursery and they have a pretty small native plant section, encourage them to sell more native plants, specifically more non-cultivated native plants. This is really important, right? Some of them are missing out on businesses, and, you know, their customers are driving across the river. So really, it's a great way. We'd love to see more, or if you know folks, encouraging them, maybe they're already growing native plants, to grow more native plants. This is just a really big deal and a gap we still see in Clark County. The next one I specifically wanted to point out, I know my coworker, Mary Coolidge, who runs the Bird Safe you know, campaign efforts at Portland Audubon, is coming in April. I talked to her about it recently. But there's just a real big focus on trying to get more folks to take the Lights Out pledge. If folks aren't familiar with this, right? That's being very aware to turn off unnecessary light, specifically during, you know, migration. And there's a pledge you can take. You get this really beautiful sign. I have it up in my yard as well. And really wanting to get more folks in Clark County to take the Lights Out pledge specifically. But also, of course, donate to either, you know, Backyard Habitat or Watershed Alliance to kind of help us continue to do the great work, and also do some of this really amazing community partner work that we're doing as well. And then this next slide just shows, you know, these are our kind of nonprofit partners that help us do the work on the ground, but also just the myriad of amazing funding partners that have come together to help support the program, so that we can offer it, that we can do a sliding scale fee for folks. And, you know, they really make this work possible. So we're really lucky to have these amazing partners doing the work. And then, of course, both Backyard Habitat and Watershed Alliance have Facebook pages, but also websites where you can find out all sorts of more info. Also, you can always go to Portland Audubon's website or Columbia Land Trust for even more info. You can also always email Bethany or I as well. But yeah, that was our presentation, but then I know there's times for questions. And Bethany, if I forgot anything, chime in.
I think we covered it all.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A, they're welcome to.
Bethany, we must be really good presenters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why in presentations, you got to leave something like intentionally vague so that you know what they're going to ask.
Well, maybe a quick question. It's hard because I can't see you all. Oh, there we go.
Oh, great.
Yeah, great. Bethany, do you see Helen's question?
I don't. I
Okay.
only see like 4 people.
Yeah.
What's going on with my video?
Helen just asked you to talk a little bit about the Watershed Alliance plantings.
Oh yeah. So the Watershed Alliance, we try to do a volunteer event every month. Weather sometimes foibles that, but we've got tree plantings, litter pickups, and invasive species removals. So the next one, there is a tree planting next weekend, as well as MLK Day is one of our really big ones. That's going to be an ivy removal in Blandford Canyon. And then we carry on with a couple more plantings. And in the summer, we do litter pickups. So yeah, there's something every month to get involved with. And it's been pretty cool because we have a pretty consistent group of core volunteers. So you can get to see the same faces month after month, which has been pretty fun. Kind of a new thing that happened out of COVID was people wanted to get outside and come volunteer. So that's been really cool.
Yeah, there is also a question about what response have you received from shorties regarding why they don't carry native plants. Bethany may have a little to say, but I'm going to give my very honest answer. So it is my co-manager, Susie, that manages our native plant discount flyer. And I know that she's had multiple conversations with shorties, but I don't want to misconstrue what those conversations were. I know that she's really encouraged them very actively to carry more. And
it's improved over the last year, and they promoted the program in their newsletters.
Yeah.
The main thing to check for is the cultivars. They haven't quite figured out native plants versus a cultivar of a native plant or a variety of a native plant, but they've got a table. They're getting there, but they're not quite there.
And that's a great example of just continue to like ask and encourage and ask, right, to really drive that interest. Because you know, a lot of times, you know, places will be like, well, nobody's asking, so I'm not selling, right? So sometimes we have to be, you know, keep after them. Another question that I see is, does it have to be the backyard, or do you also certify front yards? Great question. It's the backyard. I think it's almost like, what's the word I want to use? It's kind of like in your own backyard. I almost say it in like air quotes, right? It's kind of like that space, but it's, you know, it's any part of your yard, right? And so some people will concentrate on just their backyard or their front yard. So we don't parcel out the part of the yard. We certify a yard and kind of look at the entirety of it. But for example, if you really want to concentrate your naturescaping in the front yard, that's great. Or the side yard or the backyard or the whole yard. I hope that kind of answers, but we don't kind of, we look at it in its entirety, where you choose, or honestly, maybe where is ideal to focus, right? And that's one of the great things about what Bethany does, is she can come and look and say, this would be a really great area, or I wouldn't recommend. You know, like sometimes if I go out to a site, I've had people be like, I want a rain garden right here. And I'll be like, you just mentioned 5 minutes ago how you have standing water in this area. So I'm not going to recommend you do that, but this would be a great place over here.
Yeah.
One other question. Sorry, Bethany, that you're not seeing these.
I figured it out. I'm
okay.
seeing them. Yeah.
Sorry. Columbia Land Trust did used to have a native plant sale. It does not anymore, is the answer. Both Portland Audubon and Columbia Land Trust, we stepped away from the native plant sales and moved toward the discount flyer. The big hope was that kind of making it that people could access native plants more throughout the area on a regular ongoing basis. We have, we still hold up native plant sales that others are doing, like the schools, or the Clark Conservation District has a native plant sale coming up in February in order
It's right
to
now.
open. Yeah.
Right now. Yeah.
Yes.
So.
And there's some pop-up ones, of course, in Oregon. I've been trying to convince more folks to do that in Clark County, but I know there's always getting the right work things, put out. Let's see. Any other questions that we're missing? Okay. I'm gonna punt this one to you, Bethany, because you might know more than me. What about contacting Fred Meyer's plant section? Is that worthwhile to encourage more native plants?
It's certainly worthwhile. If you have a contact there, that would probably help. Because what I found when I talked to Shorties and Yard and Garden is there's like a particular person who's the buyer for the whole plant department. And so you have to get the right information to the right people. So I don't know if Fred Meyer buys their plants like region wide and then just parses it out to the stores. I'm not sure who the right contact would be for that. Yeah, so I'm not sure. Sorry.
Yeah, and the only other consideration I would share that we sometimes run into with some of the quote unquote big box stores is the use of neonicotinoids, right? That they will spray on plants in essence to prevent pests, but they can be incredibly toxic and like live in the soil. And so some of the bigger box stores have used that. So sometimes you kind of get the native plant, but you're almost inadvertently putting kind of this thing that has been sprayed with toxins. And there's definitely a move to reduce that, but that sometimes happens with the bigger scale folks that are kind of doing it on that mass scale versus some of like the smaller operations in general. Awesome. And what I will also say too is like, if you all have other questions, you can always direct them to us. Another great resource that we actually didn't mention, but there is a Friends of Backyard Habitat Facebook group. So the program has its own Facebook page, but there is a Facebook group that has over 2,000 folks throughout the entire region that honestly, sometimes I think have more time to answer Facebook questions than our small program team of staff. We only have 4 folks on the program team, and our time dedicated to social media is about 1%. And it's a great group. So people will post about native plants that maybe they'll say, hey, and I see this all the time, I live in Carter Park, right? I have some native plants I'm giving away. Or someone will post, you can post plants to ID them. People post pictures of an area of their yard. It's called Friends of, I think it's
Backyard Habitat. Yeah, Friends of Backyard Habitat.
And then it's like greater
Portland,
Vancouver area or something behind it, but technically Friends of Backyard Habitat. So
it was really cool, like after the big winter storm and also after the heat dome, like lots of pictures about, hey, what plants made it through, and so you can kind of get a feel for what might work well in your space. So yeah, lots of good troubleshooting on that site. I really appreciate that site.
Yeah.
Also, our website, the Backyard Habitat website, has a resource library that I like to let folks know about, because you can find articles and resources for all the different topics that we cover in our program that are just made available in one spot on our webpage, so that even if you're not getting a site visit from me, you've got opportunities to hear and research the material on your own. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and one cool kind of final resource I can think of is on that on our website, we created a new blog. And one of the really cool things that, you know, it's kind of the inadvertent things that came through COVID is we have something called the Open Gardens Project, which before COVID, and we're hoping to return to, is where we actually work with folks to open up yards so you can go and tour yards and see what people have done throughout the whole region. But one thing that we did is we reached out to some folks and asked them questions. So to talk about their yards, the transformation, the challenges, and show pictures. And so if you go to our blog, you can see examples of really amazing things that people have done and also the stories of their challenges. So it's really cool. And they'll talk about the birds they get to see in their yard and all of the really cool things, you know, so yeah. And I'll just put, I'm going to just drop my email in. So if folks think of other questions, feel free to send me an email. I won't promise the speediest time in responding, but I will respond very thoughtfully.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions, thank you guys so much for your presentation. It's really great to hear what's gone on in these past few years. I can't even believe it's been a few years.
It went really quick. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it seems like
because
yesterday.
right.
were talking
Yeah,
about
we
it in
launched
Watershed.
and then had to go on a little pause there for COVID and get back to it. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you guys for having us and asking so many good questions.
Yeah. So, thanks for supporting. I love this idea of small habitats, you know, merging together to be a non-fragmented habitat. I think that's a really fascinating idea and it's really cool to see. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I can end, or well, I can get off the live stream and Don can end the live stream.